Greetings everyone, and welcome once again. Are you ready to dive back into the worlds of Magic the Gathering and learn about the history of the products that were out there? I hope you are. We're going to be planeswalking into an interesting place today. So take my hand, your guide here, Dracovin. Remember, give a tip, a little bit of a help with liking, subscribing, ringing the bell, as we travel to the blind eternities once more and planeswalk ourselves. Worlds of Magic together. We're not going to be doing too much today. We don't want to interrupt our targets. We'll see some planeswalkers dueling, which we do not wish to interrupt. Yes, we're going to be talking about Duels of the Planeswalkers today. So this were a set of 5 special decks. Physical set of decks that were inspired by a digital namesake. A video game from Magic the Gathering that came out just the year before. The first in a series of digital games released by Wizards. The Duels of the Planeswalker games that came out on PS3. It started on Xbox 360 and the Xbox Live Marketplace. Eventually went to PS3, PlayStation Network, and became available on PC in June. Actually, 6 days after this was released. Yes, the video game version came out in June, well, right around this time. This was released also in June, on June 4th, 2010. So, this was, again, Steam versions coming out right around the time that this physical version's coming out, but we have the PlayStation 3, PlayStation Network version, Xbox Network, Xbox 360, Xbox Network versions. Its MSRP was $14.99, so about $15 a piece. Each of these 60-card decks had 5 rares, 1 foil, and an additional Magic 2010 booster to fill it out. Interestingly enough, none of them had the Planeswalkers they were named for. That were connected to them. Yeah, Planeswalker decks without Planeswalkers. Who'd have thunk it? That's a thing. It's an interesting little factoid that none of these actually have the Planeswalkers, but they are decks that would build and very well would work well if you would get a copy of the Planeswalker to put into it. This was the set symbol here, which was an M in a circle, interestingly enough. It was meant to be multi-universal, and it had an expansion code of DPA. Now, here were the 5 boxes with the apropos Planeswalkers on them. Again, they represented the powers, abilities of each of the Planeswalkers in these pre-construction forms. Basically, their themes of the kind of abilities they normally have when you have them in card form, and their overall arsenal of spells. The decks over here were, of course, the Nissa Ravain deck, Ears of the Elves, the Lana Vest deck, Eyes of Shadow, though the Ears of Elves was a black-green deck. Elves were black and green thanks to Lorman and Shadowmoor. Eyes of Shadow was just a black deck. Chantelar had the Hands of Flame deck, which was red. Garruk Wildspeaker, Teeth of the Predator, which was green. And Jace Beleren had Thoughts of the Mind, which was blue. We didn't have a white deck here. Interestingly enough, yeah, that's the only one not represented in this set of pre-constructed decks. That would be up to Wizards why they did it. Let's talk about each of the decks. We can, of course, start with Nissa Ravain's deck, the Ears of the Elves. This was, of course, an elf deck. I mean, that's the easiest way. It was inspired by a digital version of the same name in the Duels of the Planeswalker game. So, yeah. Elf Dominance continues with Nissa's black-green deck. Decimate your opponents with a legion of elite elvish fighters. So the foil here was Immaculate Magistrate, which we can kind of turn to over here. That was the first card here. It's you tap, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature for each elf you control. Pretty good rare in elf deck. The other rares, which I'm showing off here, were Elvish Champion. Elves get +1/+1 and Forest Walk. Of course, Coat of Arms, a very classic one for a tribal type deck. Basically, if things share creature types, they all get bonuses. I don't remember what it's called for instead of tribal. It's called something else. I don't remember because it's a recent change, and I will remember it eventually. But I know it's called something else. But basically, for a strategic group of creatures, yes. Gaia's Herald was also here that prevents your creature spells from being countered. Pretty good elf, very anti-blue especially. And the final rare was, of course, Talara's Battalion. It can only be cast only if you cast another green spell this turn. And so it is a second casting you do, but for 2 green mana, a 4/3 trample, it's pretty good. Now, there were a number of uncommons and commons we can talk about here. I think we mostly showed off uncommons, honestly. But some other cards from the set. Drove of Elves is a pretty good one. Power and toughness equal number of green permanents you control. Can't be the target spells your opponent. Basically as hexproof too then. Of course, the Imperious Perfect, which boosts your elves and puts elves tokens into play. It's token generation, which is always great in elf deck. The Alana Huntmaster, which when you cast an elf spell, you get an elf warrior. Hey, casting elves gives you more elves. Token generations. Of course, Eyeblight's Ending, destroy a non-elf creature. A very interesting black spell here. And of course, Elvish Promenade, for each elf you have on the battlefield, you get another elf. Doubling the elves you have. These are all very good cards, which reflect. And great elf deck. Like, these are... The combination of actual cards here for elf deck are very good. I'm just going to say that. Like, between those 10 cards, you've built up a pretty heavy, good elf deck to begin with. So, I definitely recommend. There's plenty of other cards to kind of... There are some other cards in the set. There are cards you can probably replace. This is a really good standard building spot for a very good elf deck. So, it is very good. Of course, you had Lana Vess's deck here. The Eyes of Shadow. Based on her digital deck. Rain down despair with Lana's black deck. Master the forces malevolence of death and punish your opponents with a suite of discard effects. So destruction, discard, graveyard kind of things. That's very Lana cloak as a pure black caster, necromancer kind of things. And when we talk about its rares, its foil was Ascendant Evocar. So Ascendant Evocar, pretty good black one. If you're playing a pure black deck, it's kind of one of those ones I would recommend. Legendary creature, other black creatures get boosts, non-black creatures get penalties. It's just a standardized, very good vampire deck, pure black deck, and a lot of points of time. Oops, hit the button. Hit the wrong button here. I'll switch back. But I'll talk about our next one while I search back around, because I made a mistake and hit a wrong button, and I know I did. Live mistakes. Bind Shadow. There's so many ones I have here, so certainly it's very difficult. Anyway, it's you have a card, player discard X cards at random, 2 black and X. It's a very good anti-hand thing. Mordivore. Half the number of creature cards you have in all graveyards. It regenerates. As things die, it gets bigger. Sengir Vampire. This is one that's always been interesting when it's been a rare, because it's kind of like it was the opposite of Sarah Angel. Flying. When a creature deals damage to it, put it in the graveyard, put +1/+1 counter on it. And of course, Underworld Dreams. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage. Of these here, I think the Ascendant Evocar and Underworld Dreams are the best. Our good friend there, Mind Shatter, is very good for a discard deck. But Sengir Vampire, Mordivore, not as powerful, but not bad. Similarly speaking, though, we do have Abyssal Spectre, which is a flying creature that deals damage to the player. The player discards a card. The Rack, where, hey, if a opponent has, less cards than 3 in your hand, start taking damage. This was definitely one of those ones that makes a good discard deck. And why this is strong in discard. The Grim is here too. Again, I have a deck that does focus on some discard. And I have the Grims in there. If you're playing a discard deck, Magrin is the card to have them. You, of course, have Terror. A classic, just destroying non-black artifact creatures, can't be regenerated. And then, of course, you have Demon's Horn, where cast a black spell, gain life. A little bit of life gain for you. I think of the decks that I looked at here, I feel like Eyes of Shadow is probably one of the weaker ones, but it isn't bad for what it can do. Certainly speaking, causing your opponents to discard their hands while having a number of creatures is there, but I feel like a discard deck doesn't really suit Lana as much as a zombie necromancy deck would have. Like, Nisa's deck very much felt like her. This one here, it's not a bad deck, but it's very weak and feels the weak of so far what we talked about, certainly the least connected to the Planeswalker that's being connected to it. For Chandra, we have Hands of Flame, based on, again, her deck from the digital game. Burn them all with Chandra's red deck, put your opponents on the defensive, then unload an awesome arsenal of fiery destruction. It's a burn deck. Chandra's a burn character. This one fits. Yeah. The rare foil in this one was Kamal Pitfighter, which is an interesting one because it has to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. It's a 6/1 haste. It's a direct burn. I don't mind Kamal, but he's pretty weak and pretty expensive for a tap 3. There are some better ones out there. I don't think he's necessarily too terrible as a foil, but again, not bad. Of the 3 foil rares, this is the weakest so far, even though this is the most on theme, and it does feel like a decent burn deck. We have Banefire here, which deals X damage, and if X is 5 or more, it can't be countered, and the damage can't be prevented. It's a pretty good big burn spell for targeting something, especially if you pay enough mana. You're not going to have your spell countered, the creature's not going to have the damage prevented. Shiva Dragon as a big pumping dragon, you have a lot of red mana, putting it in there. Interestingly enough, this is the part where I say there's some good stuff in this deck, but also is in a weird spot because it's kind of dual. If you're going for a burn deck, I probably wouldn't have had Shivan Dragon or Rage Reflection. Those would be more like a red Swarm Stompy, because Rage Reflection gives your creatures double strike. They have first strike and normal combat. Double strike is very strong. Rage Reflection is very good. I don't know in a burn deck. It's sort of like you're splitting your strategy a little bit in red, but it might not necessarily harm you. Just have some defense. And Furnace of Wrath, with Source will deal damage to a creature player, it deals double damage. This one is very good in a burn deck. You do have to worry about your own self being burned in a lot of ways that way, but it is still pretty good. Similarly speaking, to that, we have some other cards, which we have Bloodmark Mentor. It's great in Goblin deck. It gives all your red creatures first strike. Certainly a pure red deck, that's really good. But again, we all have the double strike too. This is getting out before the double strike. There is some mixed messages in some of the stuff in this deck, I think. Cinder Pyromancer, where it's tap to deal damage to a target. If you cast a red spell, you can untap it. Works well with casting a bunch of spells. Prodigal Pyromancer, hey, I've talked about this one before. It taps to deal damage. It's the red version of Prodigal of the Tinny. Prodigal Sorcerer, which has been out since forever. The Pyromancer version of it. We have Incinerate, classic red spell. Does 3 damage to a creature or player. Can't be regenerated. Not that regeneration's as big anymore, but this has always been a good one. It's the technical step down from Lightning, but still Lightning Bolt still good because Lightning Bolt they don't have as much anymore. An act of treason to steal a creature and give it haste when just send it at your opponent there too. Again, this is not necessarily a bad deck, I don't think. But speaking about it, I feel like it required a lot more burn cards. It has a lot of other creatures. It feels less burny and more creaturey in a lot of ways, when I feel Chandra would probably be a little bit more. But I think because a lot of these decks are very much so tend to be creature heavy and not as much spell heavy, especially on red. They did focus the most. This red deck is the most creature heavy so far of the decks we've talked about. Interestingly enough, when I feel like burn should have been So it is on brand in a lot of ways, but I do feel like it's splitting its time a little bit and should focus more on the burn stuff, and then have some creatures to kind of hit it too. Things like some other creatures I didn't mention, like their lightning elementals and stuff, work very well as other things here. The Bloodmark Mentor kind of works here. Maybe the Shivan Dragon could even work as a finisher as you kind of burn away your opponent's creatures. So it's kind of in that weird nebulous zone where it's not as bad, I think, when in comparison to something like Lana's deck, which I feel like isn't as much on brand. This is more on brand, but it has a weird split focus. That's kind of feeling about it. So far, this is the best one so far. I'm not gonna lie. And we have Jace's decks. Thoughts of the Wind. It's really interesting. I would thought every time I hear Thoughts of the Mind feel like something that I would say, but it's Thoughts of the Wind. Manipulate the fabric of multiverse with Jace's blue deck. Watch the fumbling attempts of your opponents to counter their spells and turn their creatures against them. Jace is all about mind magic, so countering, controlling, maybe bouncing are things that would fit. I'm going to say that if we're going by Jace's themes. I'm going to say that. Maybe some card draw. Now, interestingly, in the rares here, what's our first rare? A creature. Yeah. Mahamoti Djinn. Mahamoti Djinn isn't bad, but it's not really good. So this is like, I talked about how some of these like rares have been pretty weak in the colors. This is our weakest so far. Kamal can be pretty good. Ascendant Evankar, very good. Immaculate Magistrate, very good. Again, Ascendant Evankar, pretty good anyway. Like, in any black deck, I would say pretty good. Immaculate Magistrate, great elf card. Kamal Pit Fighter, pretty good. Does a burn type effect. Thaw of the Wind, it's just a dude that does some damage. It's the weakest so far of the, at least, foil rares. We do have Evacuation here, which is good. Return all creatures to their owner's hand. Now, it does bounce your own stuff, but if you are on the back foot, it's a good instant to turn the tides. Mind Spring is a pretty decent card draw. 2 blue and X to draw that many cards. Repopulate your hand, especially if you used a lot. Denizens of the Deep. Basically, enters the battlefield, return each other creature you control to its owner's hand. It's for 8 mana and 11/11. It's pretty powerful. It might be a good kind of endgame, especially if you don't have a lot of creatures. Maybe if you've already bounced everything back. If you previously cast the Evacuation on your opponent's turn, on the start of your turn, you start with Denizens of the Deep. You don't have any creatures down. It's your big starter, And then Counterbore is a very good counter spell. Because it gets rid of all copies of the same one, especially if it gets rid of, yes, it's an expensive counter spell, but if your opponent is using a playset of something or has copies of something, it's very good. So this Counterbore, not great in something like Commander, but in other formats, I definitely recommend Counterbore. So if we're talking Commander, Counterbore, not great. There's better counters for Commander. But for other formats, if you're going into Pauper, going into Legacy, Vintage, Modern, Counterbore, pretty good. Now for our other cards from the deck that kind of fill us out, we have Phantom Warrior. It's unblockable. Here's where the theme of the deck comes in. Hard to block. Flying creatures, unblockable creatures. That is a theme that's part of this deck, which isn't necessarily bad in blue. It might have being sneaky and avoiding stuff isn't necessarily outside of Jace's stuff. Necessarily. Similarly, we have Thieving Magpie. When it damages the opponent, you draw a card. It's a flying creature. I like Thieving Magpie. I've used it before. Not as much anymore. Technically, it's kind of been replaced by things, but as a decent uncommon, it's pretty there. Boomerang, return a creature to its owner's hand. Very good one, of course. Cancel, our counter spell. When counter spell kind of got replaced because it was too powerful, because it's 2 blue mana, Cancel's where we got to, so it's the kind of step down, but it's our more common version of counter spelling. And Deluge, tapping all creatures without flying, is a great way in a deck that does have a primary amount of flying creatures to exist. So this is an interesting one, as I say, like, this again kind of fills that line, kind of like Chandra. I didn't include it here, but Mind Control's in here. It's the only kind of steal a creature card in this entire deck. I would have liked a few more like things like that, maybe some other more creature stealing stuff. I feel like that would have been better in this deck. But a lot of the instants do feel very blue and traditional blue, countering, unsummoning, things like that. That is very blue. That does feel like very much like the blue controlling the battlefield does feel Jace. So I'm going to say these spells do feel more Jace than the previous deck felt more Chandra, because there should have been more burn there. And the creatures being kind of like, oh, they're flying, they're kind of unblockable, they're hard to deal with, things like that. That also, I think, does kind of fit, like, a little bit. So I feel like this one, though it's not really... It's a decent deck. It's kind of in the middle for abilities, but it does fit Jace better, too. So, but again, really terribly rare. And our final deck for talking about these is Teeth of the Predator, which harness the power of Garruk's green deck, take advantage of abundant resources, and devastate your opponent with awesome creatures. So, let's talk about this one to finish up today. And talk about how much this one has gotten it, and how it fits to Garruk and stuff. Verdant Force. I like Verdant Force a lot. At the beginning of each upkeep, not just your own, you put a 1/1 green sapling and a token in the battlefield. The more players you have, the more saplings you get. If you're doing 1-on-1, you're only getting 2 by the time it gets back to your turn. If I'm playing against 5 other people, by the time it gets back to my turn, I have 5 saplings. I like Verdant Force. It's expensive, but it's good. Creatures, tokens, that does fit Garruk very well. Now, we have Luxodon Warhammer. Equip creature goes +3/+0, has trample and lifelink. Pretty good equipment. I do kind of feel like this kind of does fit with trampling over with Garruk a lot too. It's definitely one that I can recommend. Molimo, Myro Sorcerer, a trample with power tough equal to the number of lands you control. Molimo's okay. Not particularly great, not particularly bad. I think he's fine. If you don't have a lot of lands, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't help, but, Troll Aesthetic, being regeneration, basically having hexproof. Pretty decent that way. It's, again, one of those ones that's kind of like, it's pretty decent. It's not great. It's okay. This one and Molimo are ones that look honestly better. There are better rares out there. Interestingly enough, there is a better rare here. Vigor. Vigor is very good. Vigor is a very good green card. If damage would be dealt to creature you control other than Vigor, prevent that damage, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature for each damage prevented this one. If it's put to your grave or from anywhere, shuffle it into your owner's library. Vigor comes back. Vigor makes all your other creatures not take damage and instead get bigger. Vigor is very good. It's better than Verdant Force. I like Verdant Force. I love Vigor. Now for other ones, we have Civic Wayfarer. Basically enters the battlefield, search your library for basic land, put in your hand, shuffle. It's just another way of getting some land. Roughshod Mentor. Green creatures you control have trample. It's a really good green card. It's another one of those ones similar to the red one we had before, giving them all first strike. It's good. Blanchwood Armor. Basically, hey, we're playing a forest deck. Creature gets +1/+1 for each forest you control. Howl of the Night Pack. For each forest you have, you get a green wolf token. And of course, Overrun. Overrun was an ability that Garruk Wildspeaker has. The original Garruk Wildspeaker basically can tick down to create an overrun effect. Overrun fits so much into that theme because of that. So, yeah. What can I say about all this about the Garruk's deck? It fits Garruk. It's creatures, it's tokens, it's big things, it's overwhelmingly stampeding into your opponents. This is a good Garruk deck. It is a very good green kind of token stompy deck, because you can usually do a good kind of combo of those in green. Because there are some stompy creatures, like Verdant Force, that create tokens. So you get stompy creatures, give them all trample, you're stomping in, and then you also throw out some tokens there to like absorb attacks and throw some more stuff out there. It feels like a very decent green stompy deck. And it feels very much hitting Garruk. I think like next the two green decks feel like the best decks here. So yeah. But yeah. That's the Duels and Planeswalker theme decks. And I hope you enjoyed learning all about them and seeing them here. I would definitely recommend, if you want to look into them, if you even can't get them, look at the deck lists. because they are very good starting points in a lot of ways. I think I would recommend the Teeth of the Predator or Ears of the Elves as very top tier of just a starter place for this. It would give you a lot of ideas about some classic cards, especially if you're going into things like Modern Legacy and stuff. And even other formats like Commander, knowing very good Elves, even if you're not getting multiple copies of them, or knowing multiple, like some good green cards, is a good place to start. Figure's very good. Verdant Force is very good. You know, these are things that are very good. Immaculate Magistrate, very good. You know, again, I feel like after those two, Thoughts of the Wind and Hands of Flame are okay decks, and I feel like the weakest here is the Eyes of Shadow, Lana's deck. It is just a discard deck, and that it's has some good cards in it, but it's also the weakest when it comes to connecting to the Planeswalkers. The two green decks connect their Planeswalkers the best. The red and blue connect pretty decently, but not perfectly. The black, not really at all. But again, then also when we have like Mahamani Jin in front of the blue deck, which is just bad. It's the weakest of the foil rares. But yeah, I think there are some good selections of rares in most of them, at least. Even if like their themes are interesting. There are places to start with for some of these decks. Certainly speaking, like I see the beginnings of a decent discard deck with Eyes of the Shadow. You could make out of that a decent... It's in steps in the right direction. And yeah, I think that's like why all these decks are really interesting, because they are really well made in a lot of ways. And I think that's something I can kind of say about them. They all feel really well made in comparison to plenty of other decks that are out there. And, you know, even if you couldn't find it now, looking at those for deck lists can certainly teach it. I think I will leave. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Duels of the Planeswalkers decks based on the Duels of the Planeswalkers video game. Yeah, I'm kind of sad that they didn't do a white one. But again, like, I don't remember Duels. I thought they had, like, a Johnny or Gideon in there. I don't remember, though, for sure. It's just one of those things is I didn't play a lot of that video game back in the day, because I got on the PS3 when it was, you know, like free PS Network. So I did play it for a little bit. And I think I did at least own one or two of these games, or one of these decks. So I don't think I got all, but they are really cool. They're really interesting, and yeah, even if you can't get them nowadays because they're probably much more expensive, they still give you some good inspiration for some good deck building. So I would highly recommend. Anyway, I think that's a great place to leave it, and I'm going to say, well, for now, I hope you did really enjoy being here with me and learning all about them. If you want to check out my schedule for anything else I do, I put it up on my social medias, my Discord, my Blue Sky, my Twitter/X, and over on my about kind of information part of my YouTube community part. That tells you when I'm going to be either live on Twitch, doing things like gaming or recording this tabletop stuff, or going to be over on my when I upload stuff over on my YouTube side. Both schedules are up there. Check them out. I think that's all the major things to shout out. I never remember. Do remember to like, subscribe, and the bell. And if you owned any of these, or if you did play the Duels of Planeswalker video game, let me know. I'm curious about both of those because hey, you own the game, you own any of these decks. As I said, I technically did both. So yeah. All right, everybody. I'm gonna get going. I hope you enjoyed being here, and I'm gonna say until the next time, I bid all of you out there a deep and wonderful farewell.